Hello people, welcome once again, and welcome to my gallery, which I'm in tonight, as you can see. As you know, we have a guest who nearly made it the last time he was scheduled and was unavoidably delayed because he is, it sounds very complicated, he is a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Advisory Group on AI, Artificial Intelligence. And here he is, Blay Whitby. Hello,
Good
Blay.
evening.
How the devil are you?
I'm okay. Busy day.
Good. Your main subject is ethics, isn't it?
That's right. The ethics of new technology and robotics and AI in particular.
Would you like to tell our audience exactly what ethics is while I crack open my ghostly can of Carlsberg?
Okay. Well, probably the best way to understand ethics is when someone says, what should we do in a meeting, there's two distinct senses of should. One of which is called the prudential sense. In other words, what would it be good? What would maximize the shareholder value? What would help your career? What would help you? And the other is what's morally right, which is really quite distinct. And ethics deals with what we should do in that second sense. Yes, there's many different approaches and many different opinions. I normally say it's not the sort of area you go into if you like definite answers. You you go for something like rocket science or quantum mechanics if you like an easy subject. Ethics is one where very often there is no simple answer. You have to accept that. But on the other hand, you can't avoid it. However hard you try, there are ethical decisions to be made. I could go on all night with this, John, and I'm sure people would rather talk about artificial intelligence and the sort of ethical questions that's raising.
Yeah, I know you could go on all night, Blay. Was it 2 hours we were on the phone chatting the other day?
About that, yes.
Yeah, we kept going down different pigeonholes. It was a very enjoyable occasion. So, on the subject of what's morally right and clashing with what's commercially right for your company, today we have the announcement that America has stockpiled the entire world's supply of resveratrol, or whatever it's called.
Remdesivir.
That's the one. Yeah. So, is that ethical?
No. It's right in my trade that you can give a definite answer. It's not ethical, in my opinion, and I hope that when the dust settles from the pandemic, people will reevaluate this. Commercially, and as you're pointing out, commercially, if you have a monopoly of a really useful product, then you should reduce its sale, because that will deliver extra profits, so-called monopoly profits. And there's no doubt that, I won't name the company, but there's no doubt that the drug company involved is doing just that. But I would hope that everybody can see that that's actually wrong, and it should be more widely available. And maybe we'll rethink our attitude to drugs and so on.
It's certainly not humane, is it, to keep it all for yourself?
Well, a useful way to look at it that we would employ in a philosophy seminar, say, is if someone came from Mars or from some distant planet and observed this, what would they say as an outsider with no stake in it, with no dog in the fight? And they'd say we humans were mad.
Yes.
That we thought that some people should get rich because other people were going to die.
Yeah.
What would a Martian say is a formula we often use. Well, what would a Martian say?
So we're up against, mostly in your subject area, not absolutism, not hard science, but opinion. Are we?
I think it's a little stronger than opinion. There is a trendy approach to ethics known as moral relativism, and well, I'm calling it trendy. It's popular with French philosophers of the second half of the 20th century, and it's popular in arts departments and with English critics. And moral relativism basically says there are no absolutes. Anyone's opinion is as good as anyone else's. And you can see the attractiveness of that in that certain, well, can I call them Europeans? Certain Europeans went round the world and with varying degrees of force or economic compulsion forced their view of ethics onto everyone else and often denigrated other people's approaches, even when the approaches might have been better than European ones.
Yeah.
And we want to move beyond that. But there are a number of problems with moral relativism. And you need to think you need to think hard about whether or not it's actually true that all opinions are equal in the field of ethics. The way I look at it is, if I say killing people is wrong, I'd say killing people is usually wrong. That's not the same as saying, well, we don't kill people in our living room if you don't mind. You step outside to do that. It has a stronger force. So something's wrong, it's wrong in all times and in all places. And one of the test cases for this, if you want to, take it out the realm of Martians and philosophy, consider female genital mutilation. Yeah. Now, is it acceptable to say, well, it's okay for some people to do these terrible things to little girls, because that's their custom, and we can't force our values on them? And again, I'm not suggesting a simplistic answer to this, but if you're a moral relativist, you say, well, that's their view, you've got your view, too bad. And of course, if you do have a conflict over who gets a particular natural resource and so on, there's no higher authority you can go to if you're a moral relativist. It's often going to go to a fight. Yeah. Not that I would say that other approaches to ethics are guaranteed to remove a fight, but that's another problem with moral relativism. Yeah. I hope you're finding this interesting.
Well, we've already got some viewers, and they're already commenting. That sounds to me as though it's a sort of levelling down of human rights. Being prepared for everyone's view, no matter how much harm it does to individuals. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's clear to me that there's been a tradition, particularly in Europe, of not respecting other people's views. It's a form of hubris, actually, and you can see countries catching it and thinking, well, we must know better than them because we're richer or we're more successful. And you can see individuals catching it too. Think how many wealthy CEOs and so on publish books called The Secret of My Success, and they very rarely admit that, in fact, corporate success is a bit like winning the lottery. For every Bill Gates, there's 1,000 equally good programmers and entrepreneurs who don't get rich. There's a lot of luck in it, and the idea that you have to do something right to succeed, particularly at that level, is clearly false. So it is a form of hubris, but having said all that, it's important to establish universal principles. And I don't know how many people are watching, but I would urge them to actually read the 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, because you imagine it will be either turgid or lengthy, and it's neither. It's succinct and clear, and you don't have to go, well, you only get to the second page and you realize that the very self-righteous British government isn't giving you all the rights that are in this Universal Declaration. Well, so-called Universal Declaration, I would point out there are a number of countries that wouldn't sign up to it, and still don't sign up to it. And there's a number of countries right now who clearly have no respect for it without pointing any fingers. So the idea that, you know, oh, you're an ethicist, you're just going to sit and pontificate and in the pub, as it were, or on the hub.
Well, unlike you, because I'm not an ethicist, I don't have to hold my tongue, and I can say that we're currently engaged in a battle with the Nigerian government because they have denied the human rights to a person that they've chosen to imprison, and they've denied him access to his lawyers, which they should have given him in 48 hours, and they've denied charging him, which they should have done in 48 hours. And this is a country that signed up to the human rights, choose to ignore it.
Yeah, well, the British government isn't perfect either.
No, I wasn't meaning to make a comparison. Anyway, before we go rambling on and disappear down our rabbit holes, you've got a presentation for us, haven't you?
Have I?
You sent me 3 presentations.
Yes, well, they're 3-hour-long lectures. Surely you don't want all 3. Is there anything you'd particularly like?
Well, would you like me to screen the Introduction to Current Controversies in AI Ethics? And you can talk us through it? How would you like that?
Okay. I'd quite like to cut to the chase of the standard problems for robots, if I may. But
well, you tell me. I can turn the slide.
But you screen that, and can I advance slides, or do I have to tell you to do it?
You have to ask me, I'm afraid, the way we're doing it tonight. Okay, I'll get to screen share.
Good. Right. I'm Blay Whitby. Feel free to contact me at either of those email addresses. I can't promise that I'll answer emails instantly, but I'll do my best. Do you want to move on?
Sure. Next
slide. I don't know what the next slide is. Okay. On the current trends of universities, I have to give a warning that people often have strong views about these things, and it's quite possible that I'll offend people. I really don't mean to, but to cut to the interesting stuff, you'll just have to accept that you can have a different opinion, and that's very good. This is the so-called trigger warning that university lecturers have to give now. And next slide, please.
Is the trigger warning any different now we're in the era of no platforming?
Well, don't distract me into no platforming. I've got 2 things to say about that. I think it's a very bad idea for a university, because there should be somewhere where there's open discussion, even of views for which one has no respect. That's how we advance. And the second thing is even the undergraduates have noticed this and set up a society at Sussex called Liberate the Debate, specifically to oppose no platforming. And I'm sorry if I offended anyone by saying even the undergraduates, because often they notice things before their tutors. That's another good thing about universities.
You've done enough get-out clauses for them to realise that if there's offence, it's because they took it, not because you gave it.
I was once disciplined and threatened with dismissal for putting the words to a popular song on the screen. So as a career ethicist, I do it now at every given opportunity. So that's the song for this one. There are more questions than answers, and the more I find out, the less I know. Don't worry if you don't know the song. I'm sure you can find it. Next slide, please. Okay, first, can I jump over the things I'm leading out, and then what's important here is I've divided the ethics of AI into 2 questions, as you'd expect of an ethicist. One is, should we do it? in other words, the ethical question, and the second one is the technical question: how should we do it? And unfortunately, in technology ethics, those two questions are usually all mixed up together horribly, and it really does help to try and separate them. And then I'll run through some test cases. Okay. Okay, artificial intelligence isn't really all that real. And people say, when will we have a conscious machine? Journalists phone me up and say, when will we have the first computer-written novel, and so on. There are people, in fact, I'm quite happy to name the guilty man. There's a chap called Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at Oxford in the Uhiro Institute for the Future of Humanity. There's a hubristic name, who says that AI will take over the world and keep us as pets if it doesn't destroy us. I haven't got time to do this. I gave a talk to skeptics in the pub called "Do You Want a Robot Lover?" And I've published plenty on love and sex with robots. I haven't got time to talk about AI-induced bias and prejudice, but I would refer you to the scandal of the Amazon AI recruiting system, which worked out for itself to completely exclude any hint of femininity in a CV. No one told it to give that prejudice. It acquired it for itself. It's a very interesting study, and if you ask me to talk again, I will talk about that. Nor have I got time to talk about whether or not we'll all be out of work, because the machines will do all the work. And well, you can ask me about these things. Attempts to pass appropriate laws, you might want to push me on, because I am, after all, on the Parliamentary Advisory Committee. And international regulation is a theme of mine, because I think it doesn't really matter that much what happens in Britain, because a lot of these things jump over boundaries. The thing at the bottom is a Whitbyism. That acronym stands for "This is not an exhaustive list." And I'm afraid we might find that one coming quite often. Next slide, please.
And there was me thinking it's a bit of Cornish because you're going there next week.
Could be. Right. I recommend David Gunkel's book, The Machine Question, if you're interested in this. He talks about machines as moral patients. So this is the distinction between a moral agent, something that takes moral decisions, and a moral patient, something that demands our moral consideration. And there is quite a lot of interesting debate, at least in the philosophical world, about whether or not we should treat AIs as moral patients. I'll have to leave it out. I'm not arguing really that okay, I mean, it's very hard to put this succinctly in a couple of sentences. There exists no machines at the moment that are capable of genuine suffering, in my opinion, and I'm pretty much au fait with the research in this area, and so I can say there aren't any in prospect. So we don't really have to worry about this yet. However, I am famous in a paper for which I was much derided at the time, called "Sometimes It's Hard to Be a Robot," for saying that under certain circumstances we ought to treat machines as if they had moral rights. And that's a fairly controversial thing. If people want to pick me up on that, then I'll do that. But I want to press on now. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about machines as moral agents as opposed to moral patients, because this is possible. It's happening, really. People are doing this. There are a number of teams working on letting machines take moral decisions, and yes, it's really interesting intellectually, if you like a challenge, if you're an ethicist. It's very easy to say, and I guess most people say, "Oh, no, you know, that they're just machines. They must do as they're told." But actually, in practical applications, it's not always that simple. Consider, for example, a medical advice system. And I suppose most people will have heard of IBM's Watson, the AI system that won Jeopardy, the US General Knowledge Contest. It's been commercialized. IBM didn't do it just for fun or just to prove a point. They're interested in shareholder value. And one of the commercial offshoots is Dr. Watson. And we should have seen that coming, shouldn't we? And Dr. Watson, you didn't, well, yeah, you can quote me on it, because everything I hear in the Palace of Westminster is not secret. It's all for publication. Dr. Watson is in use, and it's in use. One of its uses that worries me is prescribing care regimes for children at Alderhay, I believe. Is that the Children's Hospital in Liverpool? That's one that I heard of. Now, if you think about an AI system saying, this is how you should treat this patient, this is a suitable treatment regime for this patient, maybe you want to build in some ethical considerations for that, depending on who uses it, how well trained they are, how much ethics they know, and so on. So when I say it's no longer science fiction, well, yes, it's in practice. And I'll put it in as a side. We're into the strange year 2020 now. It is my belief that 2020 will be the year that artificial intelligence becomes a mature technology. The pandemic has put artificial intelligence out of the experimental category and into the usable category. Its contribution to finding treatments and cures is crucial, because what AI can do that it would take much longer for humans, if humans could do it at all, is pattern matching or finding regularities in big data sets. And that's exactly what you need in a global pandemic, seeing the regularities and so on. And that's one thing that, despite its lack of any real intelligence, that's one thing this AI is very good for. So I suspect that anyone not using AI on big data in the future will be seen as a pre-pandemic Luddite. It's going to be a respectable technology, and it will be used increasingly in medicine. Already there are AI systems that are better at spotting whether or not a tumor on a scan, say, is cancerous than humans. That's not because there's any miracle in the AI. Actually, let me be clear about this. That's because a human expert, a human consultant, an oncologist, might see, I don't know, 100,000 scans in a career, and they'd be expected to diagnose when they'd only seen 5 or 10,000, whereas an AI system would be trained on 10 times that number in a few minutes. So it's not that it's got some brilliant algorithm. It's just that it's had a lot of learning. Even the dumbest medical student would be good at recognizing cancerous tumors with that sort of learning example. And the more we go down this road, the more there will be big data sets, there will be effective AI that we can refine. So yes, and that in terms of diagnosis, particularly over things like recognizing tumors and so on, yes, AI will be used increasingly in this. See, I can distract myself without your help, John. Can we have the next slide, please?
So, following Dr. Watson, are we going to have Sherlock Holmes in crime detection?
Well, we already have. Yes, we have increasing use of AI by the police. Some of it, of course, is quite worrying. Now, you do meet people in my line of business who say that they can hook up an AI system to security cameras in a shopping centre, say, and spot the terrorists. They can spot the terrorists by the way they walk or the pattern of how they move through there. And as the resident ethicist, I say, no, this is too dangerous. But my view may be fading, because automatic face recognition is used a lot. In fact, when you think of automatic face recognition on CCTV and the Metropolitan Police using it in London, as I understand the state of play at the moment is they can't do it, but of course there's nothing to stop every private organisation doing it, and they do. And I have colleagues making a very successful career writing AI programs that can look at someone's face and decide whether or not they like something or don't like it. And there's a tremendous market for that, for cameras looking out of shop windows, say, and getting people's responses to the display. The next generation of cars is going to have cameras looking at the driver to work out whether they're in a good mood or a bad mood, alert and so on, and take appropriate decisions. So, yeah, what's coming is interesting ethically, I would say. And if people want to tell me I'm a Luddite to oppose automatic detection of suspicious behaviour, well, they can say that in the chat. I don't think I am. I'm really very worried about it. And too few policemen and too few members of the public realise that what the computer does is guess. Right? It is just a guess. It might be an informed guess, but it's a guess. It's not infallible. And I'd hate to see people going to court convicted where everybody's thinking this technique is infallible, because, you know, someone's written a program that made you, that triggered an alarm that you were behaving suspiciously. It doesn't mean you were behaving suspiciously. I have a lot of worries about it, but I guess that's my job to worry about these things. Should we move on? Okay. Not very many people have asked this question, but I'd recommend my 1996 book here, because there's a whole chapter, well, a fairly short chapter from the looks of things, on whether or not we need to do this. I conclude that we do. Feel free to disagree, and that seems to be a consensus view now. But I do consider it at length. The main thing is, again, there's no certainties in this field. There's no certainties in ethics. So we build an ethical code into the machine. Whoever works with it has got to realize it could be wrong. It could well be wrong. It's just not the area that affords certainty. But I think we're going to end up doing it. Next slide, please. Right. There is a case that some decisions should be made only by humans, and you might say this, but I wave a warning flag here. One thing that you have to be very sensitive to as an ethicist is conflicts of interest, and that is putting forward a point of view because you stand to gain by it. So if a human says, I don't think machines should be let into this area at all, this should be reserved for humans, that's clearly a conflict of interest. I mean, consider a group of men saying, no, I don't think women should be allowed to make governmental decisions. You could see straight away they've got a conflict of interest. They want to keep power for themselves. It's not quite so obvious in this case, but there is a conflict of interest if you want to reserve decisions for humans. I'm not saying that we might not want to do this, but now's the time really for some public debate about whether or not we do want to reserve some decisions for humans. I've talked about experiences that I've had in the security field. I can't give too many details because some of it's secret and some of it's bound by non-disclosure agreements. But you might want to say, might quite validly want to say that anyone who's stopped by the authorities or private security guards in blue water, whatever, because an AI system has said they're acting suspiciously, ought to have their day in court and be tried, by humans, where they can say, look, this is a terrible decision. In spite of what I've claimed is a conflict of interest there, this is clearly a human a human ethicist telling a bunch of humans that they ought to reserve decisions for themselves, you might very well want to say this. But what you need to hear from me is techies are going into rooms and deciding these things. Very often a couple of computer scientists and it's either a police officer or some people from a security organization, and there is no public discussion. And really, there ought to be public discussion about this one. Just how much do you trust the system? And I'm sure the problem is that people haven't caught up with the technology. They don't realize that there are systems, or there are people selling systems that claim they can spot suspicious behavior. They can pick out an individual and say, tell the security guards to stop this person. They're behaving suspiciously just because it's a pattern of behavior that their system can recognize or learn, and so on. This is not science fiction. This is being talked about, I'm afraid, but it's being talked about in secret. Please talk about it publicly. Next slide, please. Okay. There is a petition before the United Nations signed by a number of people in this field, including me, saying we should not let autonomous aerial vehicles take decisions to deploy lethal force, in other words, opposing killer drones. Now, given what I've said already, you might say, well, why are you opposed to this? Why do you want to keep a human's finger on the trigger? Slightly different thing in this case. I think the idea that an autonomous drone destroyed your village allows humans to escape culpability. And already AI is being used in quite devious, nefarious ways to avoid human responsibility. If you're interested in the anecdote, Stephen Metcalf, who is co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Advisory Group on AI, and probably would be first in line to be Minister for Artificial Intelligence. By the way, we concluded and recommended that there should be a Minister for Artificial Intelligence in Britain at cabinet level. 2 years ago, we recommended that, and I think these matters are important enough for a minister to be in hand. Stephen Metcalf said one day in a meeting of the All-Party Parliamentary Advisory Group that he'd only got interested in AI. I mean, after all, he's just a typical MP. It's not a techie. How he got interested in AI, a constituent came to him and said she'd been turned down for a mortgage. The building society or whoever was lending the money, be a bank these days, wouldn't it? There is only one building society left, pretty well. Said, we can't tell you why you were turned down. It's an AI system, you see. And so she went to her MP to get them to explain why the system had turned her down, and they wouldn't. And, I said straight away, well, couldn't or wouldn't. That's the important question. So already people are saying, oh, the AI system took the decision. We can't explain it. If you're interested, and yeah, I suppose you ought to be, the EU has got a policy on AI which says you mustn't do that, basically. AI has to be accountable and responsible. And which of course is easy for me to say, and it's easy for them to say, and yes, I was in that room, so I know that's what we want, that everybody should be able to explain their AI and take responsibility for what it does. But I wonder how well observed this is going to be in practice. Next slide, please. These are difficult questions. Now this group at Tufts, so there's various East Coast US universities, are probably the most advanced in this area, and what they're trying to do is get ways of taking moral decisions by machines. My personal view is they haven't got there yet, but And the three key names are on the bottom there, Saul Bellow, Matthias Scheutz and Bernard Maller. And look where their funding comes from. I'm convinced, having done some work with them, that they're quite insulated from their source of money. But if you think people have to respect where the money comes from, then maybe you'll disagree with me. They've also come up with some standard problems for moral robots, which I hope we're going to go on and discuss, or at least one of their standard problems. Are we up to the test cases yet? Next slide, please.
Pretty much, I think. Where have I heard the name Saul Bellow? Is he an author or a journalist?
He's a philosopher. He's a very sincere guy.
He's written books. That's why I've heard of him.
How can we engineer analysis? Okay, now let's do the technical questions. How can we build it? What ethics do we put in? And as we already said in the introduction, there isn't a worldwide consensus on what is right and wrong. I'm quite happy that there isn't a consensus. I think if you meet an ethicist who says, no, there's definite right and definite wrong, and that's that, you should start to feel very uneasy at that point. The expression I like is that some things should be under permanent negotiation. And maybe you don't like that. Maybe you want things nailed down, certainty. But I'm afraid I'm not that sort of ethicist. I haven't been up a mountain and come down with tablets of stone, and if I had, that would make things a lot easier. I think there's a lot of difficult open questions here, which I'll do my best to answer, but what I can't offer you is certainty. It just doesn't happen in this field if it happens in the real world at all. Next slide, please. Okay. Let me just quickly put Asimov's three laws in the bin. I'm never really sure whether I've read all of Asimov's robot stories. Everybody's heard of the three laws, which are they on the next slide? Everyone's heard of the three laws, but I'm here to tell you, you must read the original text. Yes, this is one of my catchphrases, and I'm saying I have read the original text. And Asimov wrote over 50 robot stories. I don't know whether I've read them all, but I've never been contradicted on what I'm going to say now. In every single case, the three laws don't work. He's making a point that they don't capture reality, that you can't put laws into robots. I mean, he might have been making a stronger point that all laws are subject to interpretation and so on. But my reading of Asimov is these laws won't work, which is why I don't like people throwing them at me in talks. One doesn't want to be rude, and one's not allowed to be rude to professional non-listeners or students, as I have to call them now. But please read Asimov before you quote the three laws to me, because his whole point is they won't work. Right? So I'm not suggesting anything like the three laws. They're beautiful laws, and they're nested within each other. And if that doesn't work, I don't think any law-based approach is going to work. Next slide, please. Down at the bottom there was a thing which you could read if you want. Of the last slide. Can we go back to the last slide? Don't worry if you can't. It's just now we're going forward.
Yes,
I think, but don't worry. A lot of people think it has to be rule governed. Why? As opposed to a neural net or a modern AI technique. That's what ANN stands for, their artificial neural net. Why do they think it should be rule governed? So that we can look into it, so that we can look under the hood and see why it's taken the decision it has. There's quite a live debate in the area with some people saying no, AI's got to be inscrutable, and some people saying no, it's got to be scrutable at all points. The other approach you could take, which is possibly one I favour, is logging, like in a flight recorder, of how it got to a decision. But this is amazingly computationally heavy. Just in case there's some real computer whizzes listening, and I guess there probably are, this is where it gets interesting. Consider an autonomous vehicle controlled by an artificial neural net that's been in a fatal accident, and there has to be an investigation. Now, what we don't want is for the large US tech company involved to say what drove Stephen Metcalf into the area. We can't tell you why it did what it did. It's a neural net. It's artificial intelligence. And very sorry that it killed your granny, but there's no way of finding out why it does. That's not good enough. There has to be a way of working out how it did it. Now, this is not a job for lawyers or even drivers or journalists or anyone like that. In fact, just as in aviation investigation, you want to push all those people back. This is a job for techies. This is a job for AI programmers, basically, to get down and dirty, as it were, with the code, because no one else can. And they should have as much time and access as it takes to work out why it did what it did. And actually, if I were an undergraduate now, I would see an opportunity in that sort of AI forensics, because there's lots of areas, and the autonomous vehicle is an obvious one. There's lots of areas where we're actually going to need that level of investigation, and yeah, as I say, it's not a job for someone who doesn't understand the technical details, and I do mean details.
So what about computer vision? I suppose go into it and pick it.
I'm afraid I missed your sound, John. I don't know if we got a technical problem here.
We had an echo, didn't we?
Yeah, I'm not criticising the IT gods at this point. In fact, I'm praising them, because this is a job for the hackers. This is a job for the smart kids. It really is. Yeah, next slide, please. Test cases. Okay, let me just run through these test cases. You'll know some of them. In 1968, well, I'll go through in turn, but it's SitH, footbridge. SitH is the runaway tram. Footbridge used to be called the Fat Man, but we can't say that anymore. Race Murderer at the Door is very interesting. The Care Robot is one that I've often been invited to workshops with that Moral Robots group at Tufts to talk about. And I Kissed a Girl is one that makes an interesting approach to moral relativism. And I'm glad we discussed moral relativism at length, because I Kissed a Girl is how your robot deals with moral relativism. Let's hope they're in some detail now. Next slide, please. Okay, in 1967, as you can see, an Oxford philosopher called Philippa Foot proposed a thought experiment which has become celebrated as the Trolley Problem. It's the Trolley Problem because it was later taken up by an American philosopher, Judith Jarvis Thomson. And the idea is that in the switch, you can only, if you do nothing, 5 people will die, but you can switch the tram onto another track and kill 1 person. Next slide, please. I might even have a picture of this. Yes, there you go. I commissioned a local artist to make the picture. She says you're the driver. It was taken up later, as I say, by Judith Jarvis Thomson, who made you a bystander because she thought you might have an interest, conflict of interest, if you were actually the driver. Now, normally at this point it asks for a show of hands. Who would switch and kill the one? And normally a majority of people would. Fine. Let me just point out some things, because you don't get such a majority among philosophers. What you have just said you would do is to deliberately kill an innocent person. And in most moral codes and legal systems, that's murder. That's cold-blooded murder. If you do nothing, you run over 5 people, it's true, and kill them all, that's manslaughter. Just in case you're interested. If you say, well, given the choice, which you are in this unfortunate thought experiment, you should always act so as to minimize deaths. Think carefully about that, because if you were really interested in minimizing deaths, you'd close down Worthing Hospital and send all its doctors and nurses to the Sudan, where they would save more lives proportionately. Minimizing death is it's a good principle, but now you see why I say there's no absolutes in this area. Next slide, please. I'm not saying you're wrong to change tracks. That's an awkward one. Right, became the trolley problem. The bystander. I've said all this. Next slide, please. And we have to call it switch now. The names. Now, unfortunately, I have to introduce a male philosopher at this point. Jason Miller, a Canadian philosopher, rewrote the trolley problem with reference to autonomous vehicles. Next slide. Is he on the next slide? Yes. The idea is that the car's going through a tunnel and it only has two options, which is either to kill the child that's run out in front of it, or to swerve into the tunnel wall, avoiding the child, but killing you, the occupant of the car. And Miller says, how should the car react? A few things to say about this, if you're interested. Bertrand Maller, I've given you his name already, with the Tufts Group, did a big online survey, and one thing that came out of that is people wanted different behavior from an autonomous vehicle than they wanted from a human driver, or they expected the machine to switch, i.e. kill the one, more often than they would expect a human to do it. Why there should be different standards for the two is very interesting. I'm writing a paper on that at the moment. If you can tell me the answer, I'll include it in the paper, but steal the credit, of course, because that's the academic way. Yes, a lot of people... There's a lot of other things rolled into Miller's experiment. It isn't really switch. One of which being, if you've paid for the car and you're the owner, then again you have an interest. Would you buy a car if, in the small print, the agreement that you clicked agree on without reading, which you should never do, trust me, it said, under certain circumstances, this car may kill you in order to save life. Would you buy it? And a lot of people say they wouldn't. So that's another interesting thing about the tunnel problem. It's alive and well and being debated all over the place, even among autonomous vehicle designers. Next slide, please. Yeah. Let me just throw this one at you. Who should decide? Are you happy with a bunch of programmers who've never even heard of ethics, in spite of my best efforts, taking this decision? And do you want them to make it random? Do you want them to program it to always minimize the total number of deaths? And again, restoring gender balance here, I'd refer you to Heather Roth in a 2018 paper called The Folly of Trolleys, which basically says it's not the job of engineers to solve this long-standing philosophical debate. And I'd thoroughly agree with Roth, actually, not least because there isn't a solution. There isn't something you could just program in. That's why it's run and run. That's why if you do moral philosophy, you spend your entire first year talking about this runaway tram. And that's why I've said repeatedly, it's not an area you go into if you like easy answers. You just make your car as safe as possible. You don't try and solve, a moral problem that's been with us for since '67 anyway. Next slide, please. Yeah, Patrick Lynn, another important name in the area, nice guy, Patrick Lynn, says he kind of puts the burden onto the programmers and designers, saying humans have to make snap decisions, but they've got all the time in the world. I've kind of argued against Lynn, and in the paper I'm writing at the moment, I'm saying Lynn's wrong on this, because you can... Well, what's effectively happening now is this attitude and this problem is stopping us introducing autonomous vehicles, and yet autonomous vehicles would save, well, let me see, hundreds of thousands of lives worldwide. I mean, they're not that good, and they would kill some people, but humans are terrible at driving. So it would be an improvement. But yeah, the real impetus for autonomous vehicles seems to be fading right now. I'm happy to take lots of questions on autonomous vehicles, but I want to give you some other test cases. Next slide, please. Yeah, I've said all this. This is the Bertram Maller's paper on different standards for in the sacrificing one for many. Next slide, please. The footbridge. Now, good old Judith Jarvis Thompson found that maybe people are okay about pulling a switch to switch the tram onto a track where it kills one person rather than 5. But suppose, in this case, you're standing on a footbridge with a rather large individual, and if you threw them off the bridge in front of the tram, that would stop it, thereby saving the 5 people. Would you do it? And it's an interesting fact about human psychology that every time you ask this, far fewer people would throw the large individual off the bridge than would actually pull a switch just to change tracks. But if you're really committed to the principles of minimizing the number of deaths, you should in fact just throw this person off the bridge. In this case, it's much more clearly murder, and it feels much more like murder to people. So it's an interesting variation on the trolley problem. Next slide, please. Right. There's some technical words here, but don't worry about that. Consequentialists say that all that determines the rightness or wrongness of an action is its consequences. If you're familiar with Jeremy Bentham and classical utilitarianism, always acts so as to promote the greatest happiness of the greatest number, you'll understand consequentialism. And I was taught as an undergraduate by a long-haired Australian postgrad called Peter Singer, who was one of the people who was instrumental in changing the name from utilitarianism to consequentialism. I can go through the technical details of that if you like. Deos is Greek for duty, and deontological ethicists think, well, some things are right and some things are wrong, irrespective of consequences. It's not just about consequences. Some things are really wrong, and I can make a strong case for that. Unfortunately, for these people, and think what you want your robot to do in the race murder at the door case, Kant actually says that you must never lie, even if by lying you could save a life. And of course, this thought experiment is constructed to be that. So the idea of this one is you answer the door, and knock knock, who's there? Gestapo. We believe that you have a Jewish family. We think you've got that Frank family hidden in your attic, right? And now, if you're a deontologist, at least according to Kant, Immanuel Kant, who's the big philosopher of this area, you have to say, I cannot tell a lie. I have indeed got the Frank family hidden upstairs, because lying is wrong. Even though you know, as you say this, that you're condemning them to certain death in Birkenau. Now, if you're a consequentialist, you say, no, I wouldn't harbour any Jews. You lie through your teeth because the consequences are so great. Now, again, it's a thought experiment designed to pull those two groups apart and to look embarrassing for the deontologists. Trust me, lots of things look embarrassing for consequentialists too. Otherwise, if there was a simple answer, it wouldn't be ethics, would it? There's lots of problem cases for them. But of course, again, would you purchase, build, license a robot that's programmed to lie? under certain circumstances, programmed to tell great big fat lies. Is this just a silly academic debate? No. This is a debate that the design teams for Siri, Cortana, and Alexa are having right now. How much lying is acceptable? And consequences, if you're going to say, well, obviously you should lie to save a life. Yeah. Should you lie to increase the profits of Amazon Inc.? Should you program your machine to do so? These are the sort of questions that we're discussing right now. Next slide, please. Yes, now this is one from that group at Tufts. And I find it more interesting actually than most people do, but again, it's very close to reality, very close to the market. The idea is that an old person has a care robot who looks after him, provides his personal care. This is very close to market. And if you're interested, the University of Hertfordshire has done a lot of very good work on this, and one of their postgrads did a nice little study, and basically they said, if you ask people, you do a survey and say, would you like to be looked after by a robot in your old age? People say no. However, if you phrase the question, would you like us to develop artificial intelligence technology which will enable you to remain independent and in your own home for longer, they say yes. It's just a question of how you phrase it. But anyway, this care robot is allowed on occasion, if the old person is in a great deal of pain, to administer painkillers. Let's say it contains them and can dispense them. However, it has to get permission from the doctor. Right? But this morning, the old person is in a lot of pain, and the doctor's not responding to messages. Can the robot give the painkillers without authority? And I'm inclined to cut the robot a little slack in this situation, but most people I talk to say, no, never. It's a robot, it must never break the rules. And a lot of the cases that Tufts are working on are really about when and how we would program a machine to break the rules. And again, I find this fascinating. I don't have a bucket full of solutions, but I do find the questions fascinating, and I hope other people find the questions fascinating. Technology. It'll be good if they ever get it to work.
The internet broke, I'm afraid.
Have I been chatting?
Well, you froze and we lost your sound. I don't know what happened, but we are now back. So what I suggest we do, because you said such a lot of interest, I suggest we go to the comments and the questions, because they've been coming in. And I've been thinking of some of my own, of course, as you know, I am wont to do. When you were talking about the care robot, it reminded me of a viral video I've seen in which a toddler is by the sea, by the water's edge of the sea. She drops her ball into the waves and is venturing into the water to collect this ball when the family's pet dog grabs her by the bottom of her skirt, reverses, pulls her back out of the water up onto the beach, and then goes into the water himself and collects the ball, brings it back to her. Now, leaving aside all the questions of whether that is instinct or evolved behavior or trained behavior, is there something there that we can learn from nature? Is behavior going to be able to solve some of these thorny questions, like whether to drive the car into the wall of the tunnel or hit the small child? Is there a sort of fail-safe, put the brakes on and carry straight position?
Well, you're mixing two examples. Which one do you want me to talk to? The car or the care robot?
You know what I'm like, yes. Let's go with the care robot. Let me just put the call right on this.
Well, what the puzzle with the care robot is, do you want it to break the rules? And my personal feeling is yes, you do in this case, but not generally. And that's what's really difficult to program. But nonetheless, I think we should swallow a bit for the risk of this. Certainly we shouldn't increase risk. The robot should do better than a human carer, or should be more careful than a human carer, or we sack it. We just don't use it. But I'm quite prepared to accept that blindly following rules won't always get the best outcome. And sometimes breaking the rules is better, and it sounds just the sort of thing an ethicist would say, doesn't it? But it is
more, but to be broken.
It is really true, and in a narrow case, we could do this. But I would say my view is pretty much a minority view, and when you do get a care robot, it won't break the rules. Not least, and this one does lap over to autonomous vehicles, not least because there are manufacturers and lawyers, lots of lawyers involved in this, and they're really not happy with the idea that they could be selling you a product which would do something against the rules. That's just too risky for any current manufacturer and their lawyers to contemplate. But it would be good to have widespread public debate about this, because this isn't science fiction. This is coming. There are people in labs playing with this sort of thing right now.
Yeah.
Do you want me to talk? What did you say about the car? My feeling is designers, programmers, engineers should make their autonomous vehicles as safe as they possibly can.
Yeah.
How do we test that in court? We wheel in someone from another firm or an academic expert in autonomous vehicles who's going to say industry best practice is. These people fell short of best practice. Can engineers do this? I'm using engineers deliberately here. Engineers are really good at this. Engineers form professional organizations. They publish codes of conduct, and they should be prepared to say, well, no, you don't put flammable cladding on your building. That is not the sort of practice we expect of professional engineers. And for the most part, obviously I picked on a case where it went wrong, but for the most part, engineers do work to high standards. And they're prepared to examine each other's standards and say, no, that wouldn't be safe. Do they lie and cheat? Well, I guess Volkswagen give you an example of yes, they do. But we should just push people to work to the highest standards there. Will there be fatal accidents with autonomous vehicles? I'm afraid so. We can't make anything absolutely safe, but I think they should be investigated in the style of aviation accidents by technical experts on a no-blame basis to work out what happened. So we'll fix it. We'll then fix the whole system so that particular class of accident won't happen again. Does it work? Yeah. Over my lifetime, it's transformed airline flying from something you might want to write a will before doing to the safest way to travel. Does this method work? Yeah. It's worked for aviation.
Yes. Not perfectly. Here's a question.
I beg your pardon?
Here's a question.
Oh, Stu bloke. If we manage... yeah. Okay. I've got a number of things to say about this. One is with great interest, and the paper I'm writing at the moment might say this. We've not got to be so hubristic to think that we can't learn, because we're far from perfect. But on the other hand, we don't want to charge into a situation where we say, let the machines run everything, because we're so hopeless. We need to take some sort of balanced attitude between, oh, we're hopeless, please look after us, and no, we know everything, you're just a machine, shut up. We need to find that middle course, and it's going to be amazingly difficult, because, you know, I meet people who are really at the polls on this one, really think humans are hopeless, and if the machines kill us all, that'd be better for everyone. And others, no way, don't give them any chance to take these decisions, keep them out of it. I've got a colleague, Joanna Bryson, whose most famous paper, and it's a good paper, I recommend it, it's called Robots Should Be Slaves. And essentially she's saying, we build machines to be slaves, we don't give them any truck at all in interfering in our lives, they do what we want. And it's, you know, as I say, I think there's a middle course here. It could well be that we could learn things. In fact, I think we are learning things, one of which might be with driving. We've been way too lenient on human drivers.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Why should we expect so much higher standards of autonomous vehicles? I mean, already they're about 10 times as safe as humans, but that's not safe enough for us. Well, that kind of suggests that historically we've been very forgiving of human inadequacy.
Yeah, yeah. So will we ever be able to program robots to want to do what we want them to do, so that we're not forcing our standards upon them?
Yeah. I know people who are trying, John, but I would say don't hold your breath.
No.
We really don't understand the question there. We know how to program machines,
Yes.
but
Intentionality is something else.
yeah, we don't have any real. We don't have a scientific understanding. It's still a happy hunting ground for philosophers.
Yeah.
And I say this as someone who has an office, you know, opposite a sign saying the Sackler Centre for the Scientific Study of Consciousness. I don't think we're ready to have a science of consciousness. Yeah, I mean, mainly because science depends on reliability of measurement, and if you can't measure, then, well, I talk about being over the speculation frontier, and with a lot of these questions, like the one you just asked, it is over the speculation frontier. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not one of those philosophers who say, oh no, it can't be done, there's some magic about human consciousness. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, technologically, we're not close.
Yeah.
But we are close to, I don't know, face recognition, behavior recognition, medical diagnosis, medical treatment, recommendation, autonomous vehicles, all the stuff I've talked about, care robots, or what are they called? Smart homes, right?
Yeah.
For people with declining cognitive capabilities. All these things are, you know, they're available now. Oh, robot nannies. I forgot to mention robot nannies. Yeah, you can buy them now.
Yeah.
So I'm keeping out of the science fiction here.
Yeah. We had an interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago with Professor Sophie Scott, neuroscientist from Imperial College. Of course, neuroscience is an infant field at the moment, but maybe that's what's going to unravel a bit more of this empirical understanding of what's going on in our brains.
Well, when I teach philosophy undergraduates, I say don't rule out big progress in neuroscience, because every year there's 10 times as many neuroscientists. And time was when the only way you could look at a brain was at a piece of dead meat on a plate. Now we have scanners that will let you look at an active brain. I mean, admittedly not close enough in time, not a narrow enough time slice to really track down thoughts. I mean, what you're looking at is how much oxygen is being metabolized in a particular area. But even that is producing loads and loads of results. So I tell philosophy undergraduates, you know, never to say never about this, because there will be more. And now, again, at the Sackler Centre for the Study of Consciousness, Anil Seth will tell you loads about this. You've got him coming up, right? He's director of this institute. They can put people in fMRI scanners and ask them to carry out a task and see which areas of the brain light up and so on. So an awful lot more information coming in all the time. But again, I have neuroscience students who say, this is going to answer everything. And I don't know that it is, because we just keep looking at the brain in finer and finer detail, and we'll find consciousness without a point. It's there. And I know you need to be clearer about the question. You need to be clearer about what you're looking for. And
if we are going to find out, it's going to be through scientific investigation anyway.
Yeah, but the science has to be informed. and just putting people in the scanner and hoping to see things, hoping to see a soul, is not informed. So you need a good psychology. And admittedly, psychologists need to change the questions they ask, as it turns out that brains don't do any of the things they thought they were doing. But it's kind of an exciting area to be in.
Yeah, definitely. So here's another question. Do you know much about this?
Yes. What do you want to know, Terry? Yes. At Sussex this year, I would say 40% of our undergraduates were from China. Well, including Hong Kong. And I have to make, I don't want to be too political, but there's the world of difference between a student from mainland China and a student from Hong Kong. When you have them in your seminar, they don't seem to be from the same country. I'll just leave it at that. Traditionally, can I say most AI research until probably 2005, most AI research was funded by the US military. I have been disciplined for saying this. You're not supposed to know, but it's a pretty poorly kept secret. In fact, I'll point the finger even more, since you've asked about who's involved in this research. I've said the Moral Robots Group get their funding from the Department of Defense. The AI lab at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, has really been the main research center, or from, I would guess, from around about 1960 to 2000, it was the main research center. And the director of the AI lab at MIT essentially gets a check from the Pentagon. And that doesn't mean that all the money has to be spent on military projects, far from it. In fact, one of the ways the US does investment in promising science is to put it under the guise of the military. They have an enormous military budget, and a lot of it is going onto stuff with very little scientific application, including AI. Very little military application, including AI. But nonetheless, military AI has been pretty advanced and still is advanced. I can't tell you exactly what the military have achieved lately because it's secret and they don't tell me, but I can make some guesses. If I had a falling out with Rod Brooks, director of the AI lab at MIT, when I said that a particular idea wouldn't work in Afghanistan, and he curtly said, we sell our robots to the military, they don't have to tell us what they do with them. China has made a massive push in the 21st century to get a technological lead by whatever means possible. Right? I don't know if they employ ethicists. I've got a paper waiting to be read about Confucian ethics for robots, which I will read with interest. But it looks to me like they want to get a technological lead, whatever way it takes, and that includes flooding our universities with their brightest and best, which, until the pandemic, I think was a major source of income for UK academia. Who's ahead in what? It's very hard to say. The UK it's a snapshot, and it won't last. But if we look in 2020, I would say the UK might very well be the world leader in AI. Well, it won't last. I'm old enough to remember when the UK was the world leader in microcomputing, and the BBC put a machine in every school. And in jetliners, yeah. It's a transitory situation. Because the sheer funding that China and America can put into this will soon dwarf. But just at the moment, and particularly the sort of things that I've rambled on about tonight, and in the philosophy and theory of AI, the UK is definitely in the lead for the moment. You see, for AI, you don't need a massive factory. You don't even need military funding. Really, you just need a room full of smart people and a few computers. And that's literally all you need.
Yes.
But I will give you one depressing thought. A number of times, enough to have lost count, I've seen graduates that I've taught set up a little company, either in Hove or Basingstoke, so jeans and t-shirts company, 4 or 5 of them, and work on a truly brilliant AI idea. I've sort of been to visit them and seen them, and the minute it looks like being commercially successful, a large US corporation has appeared and just put zeros on the check until they stop. Basically, it's part of my advice saying, no, don't take it. Don't take the money, because I've seen it before. You won't know what to do with yourself for the rest of your life. Don't take the money, but, when it's enough money to buy your own island, which it sometimes is, I am, I mean, maybe not a fortune, but I'm talking millions, right? That's I don't know whether to be sad about that or not, but I have seen that happen.
Well, on the note that currently the UK is in the lead, hopefully, cross your fingers.
Only for the moment.
That's a good moment to end, but you are coming back, aren't you? Although
I can't come back next week, I'm afraid.
Not next week, so we've got to postpone you to the 15th of July.
Okay.
And I can also announce to our viewers that on the 22nd of July, the subject we're going to cover is nuclear power and its relevance to climate change, and whether it can help us to save our planet from that threat. And so we need somebody now for next week. This is a call to help, call for help. If anyone, and this includes you, Blay, if anybody has got contact with a potential guest who would like to appear on Skeptics in the Hub a week today, please let me know. Just put a post in our Skeptics in the Hub Facebook group. Blay, you have been at least as wonderful as I expected you to be.
That's very kind of you.
And we're very much looking forward to having you again in a couple of weeks' time. But for now, take the rest of the day off.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.